Yes, I'm Rachel Johnston, and I am speaking to you today from Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa, where I live and work as a social consultant, providing a variety of social support services to mining companies. So yeah, real honour to get to share my thoughts with you today around the theme of mining extraction and a just transition. And I've entitled my talk today, Walk the Talk. So you'll find out a little bit more as we go along. I think it has been said probably at every session, but this rapid shift to low carbon energy systems is a necessity for the world as a whole, but it requires increased extraction of minerals and metals in very specific locations. And this will probably enlarge and intensify existing social and ecological injustice. So things like social exclusion, impacts on land, natural resources, etc. As I start off, I think the question that I really would like to ask is just transition, yes, but just for whom? From my perspective, working in the social sphere in the extractive sector, a just transition is about communities. Communities that are impacted living around the mine, that they be treated justly so that they don't lose out, and they be treated fairly so that they gain from the presence of the project. It's also about the workers securing their rights and livelihoods, getting them decent work in this shift to cleaner forms of production. So the questions I think we need to be asking in the light of just transition, and I think it's been mentioned quite a few times over the past few days, is who bears the burden, who shares the benefits of global energy transition, and how can we ensure it's a fair and equitable process for both workers and communities. And being careful that even though, and I'm going to quote here, more clean energy means more mines, we don't sacrifice communities in the name of climate action. So I think one of the difficulties in this space is that a significant proportion of mining operations are located in very complex and fragile states that perform quite poorly on key social and political indicators. So I think the easiest way to look at this is always kind of a map. And so I just want to share with you a map which shows kind of key minerals and where they're located. So just have a quick glance at that. And then I'd like to move on to another map, which shows, this is from research done by the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining from the University of Queensland in Australia. And it really highlights that mining development affects regions very unevenly. If you kind of look at the top map, you will see hotspots in red, which are high environmental and social risk areas, and the cold spots in blue, which are lower environmental and social risks. And then there's points in black, which are where mining projects are located outside of those. And then if you mirror that with map B, you have the World Bank's global governance map using worldwide governance indicators. And so what it shows is that countries with the greatest number of hotspots are China, Mexico, Peru, South Africa. And between these countries, they total 1,247 mining properties in high complexity settings with weak governance scores. Now, why am I highlighting this? Why do I bring this up? Well, mining activities are already known to alter social articulation of communities, to exacerbate pre-existing vulnerabilities. And yet, as these papers highlight, this research highlights, in these high governance risk countries, the safeguards are not in place to protect the people living, working in the vicinity of a mining project. And these are the people who are bearers of social risk. But having said that, it's not that I want to discourage mining companies from working in these areas, because I've also seen firsthand the very real positive impact that mining companies can have. One example is employment. In these settings, if you just have one member of the family with a stable and decent job, it can impact the entire extended family and possibly the entire community. So just as an example, when I was a general manager of a mining services company, staff would actually knock on my door at the end of the month and tell me what they had, that they had bought land, that they are building their houses, and they're sending their kids to school, they've looked after sick members of their family, all with their month's salaries. And so it really struck me at that point that all of this development was occurring with the dignity that I find sometimes missing in development or aid projects that I'd worked in previously. Again, in the countries where I live and work, informal subsistence farming represents like 98% of working population. So you can imagine that having employment with a regular, probably above average salary is a huge positive impact that has potential to bring development to entire communities. The problem is that usually social implications of this kind of rise in extraction are rarely acknowledged in the energy transition scenarios, and yet they have to be taken into consideration if we really want to talk and live through a just transition. So I think what I want to say is that mining companies do pose a huge amount of risk, but they also have large potential to bring great benefit. But if they want to do so, they need to identify these social issues. They need to commit to including them in their planning and provide the necessary resources to implement it. And maybe you're saying, what sort of social considerations or implications am I referring to? Again, just an example, but one that's preoccupied me for a while is the mining automation. Because although it represents technological breakthrough, it promotes a cleaner, cheaper, safer, and more socially responsible form of production, the upside narrative hides an important downside, especially for countries in the developing world, which is the reduction of local jobs in the number of workers, and also potentially the expertise has to initially be found outside the country. And although some companies probably argue that we're still making an effort to recruit locally, we're usually talking about areas with very cheap labor. So once again, it kind of raises the question in my mind about fairness and justness. So is the mining industry, for example, considering how these technological trends will affect local communities, particularly in regions, again, where I live and work, where communities often enter into land use agreements. They've given up all of their land and they expect employment opportunities and other economic benefits in return. And so in this case, for example, automation actually extends the injustice rather than benefiting the mine affected communities. And another aspect that kind of preoccupies me is the urgency of the transition. We all know it's urgent, it has to be done. But I also wonder whether projects will justify social sacrifices, social costs that might not have been acceptable otherwise in the name of the urgency of this transition necessity. So again, to quote researchers from Queensland, Nick Vayton, there's a greater risk that people will be crushed under the weight of a grand green narrative. So to me, a just transition is about consciously deciding to act in a certain way. And yet the thing that surprises me is that I haven't heard the term just transition used here in West Africa or in East Africa by the senior management and sustainability teams that I talk to on a regular basis. I also read quite a lot of mining company sustainability reports in the context of my work as I try and get social performance information. And they usually contain lots of terms and concepts, or dare I say buzzwords, in line with the latest trends of either corporate social responsibility, sustainability, social performance, ESG, or whatever term is being used. But when I go into the field or onto site, the reality on the ground is often quite different. So it's easy to write narratives that tend to reflect back to shareholders, investors, and readers what they expect and want to hear. Companies kind of maximize what's behind the term without necessarily acting meaningful change in the practice. So again, I just ask, just for whom? And I'd also ask priorities, whose priorities are really being considered when decisions are being made. Because time and again, I experience mining companies making decisions solely based on return to either investors, company interests, dare I say, executive and management bonuses, while communities whose entire lives have been disrupted, and not by choice, come in last position. The construction mantra of a mining project is always build under time, under budget. And when social performance teams are told or come with their proposals or budgets, their programs are told to come back when cash starts flowing. But the problem is when cash does start flowing, the underpower temporary solution has either become the final result and you don't go back and build something better, or it's just too late. So the social investment project's fallen over because it hasn't been properly planned. The resettlement project has been shoddily done and it's broken confidence within communities. Communities are struggling to restore their livelihoods without assistance from the company. You kind of thinks, well, compensation should be sufficient. Construction is over and the time to maximize local recruitment has passed, and communities feel that local employment and procurement opportunities promises haven't been kept. So social indicators that would ensure a lasting positive legacy are too often ignored or misjudged. Social performance is still not a factor in driving investment and operational decisions at the moment. So how do we ensure a just transition going forward? To me, there's still quite a gap between the meaning given to just transition that we find in policymakers, and I've been hearing echoed in the different talks over the past few days, and the multi-dimensional reality of a living concept. So you've got companies working in very different complex environments, dealing with people, impacted communities, local workers, and cash always being a determining factor in what can and can't be done. So how do we move forward? I think, as I said at the beginning, just transition has to be grounded in a conception of justice and of fairness in terms of distribution of benefits and burdens. And it concerns many areas. So wealth, energy, gender, race, human rights, climate inequalities, and the list goes on. But we're quite behind already in all these areas. And yet we need to transition fast and urgently. So I can actually already hear my mining colleagues going, oh, you social people, you always want your cake and eat it. And I think my retort would be, yeah, we can't continue on the way we're doing it, because decisions are still putting the interests of corporations over workers and communities. And if we want a just transition, we have to radically change how resource extraction is conducted, how people think. Companies need to carefully think through social implications of how they operate, reflect these in their strategy, their planning, their budgeting, and even their bonuses. They need to take time, commit, rethink targets, deadlines, business as usual scenarios. And I also believe strongly that vision needs to be carried from the board down to senior management and to each single employee, ingrained in the company culture for it to work. Otherwise, my fear is that just transition will be more about people in the developed world buying electric cars, and then the people where I live even more marginalized and disadvantaged. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Rachel. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Ludovine said that you were going to be brilliant, and yeah, you very much exceeded that. So Rachel, with regards to all of this, and please, by the way, people have got questions, put them into chat and share them with us. In terms of that information, and Ollie, I'm sure will agree with this, the getting out there and seeing what's happening on the ground, rather than just believing what's in all of those glossy reports and perhaps what's kind of scraped off the internet by some of the organizations where they're saying, okay, what's going on here? How do we improve this? So how do we actually get people to see what is actually happening on the ground and get that transmission of reality out to the broader world?
I think a lot of it is asking questions. So when we read things, we usually put our perspective. When you read something or when I read something, we'll read it with our lens and assume that certain things are being done or assume it's certain ways. So I think the real important part is asking questions, and it's everybody asking questions. It's boards digging a little bit deeper into, when you say that, what do you mean? It's, civil society going, show us, proof. You say that, but what do you mean about it? Dare I say, also look at yearly sustainability reports. It's what you said in the last one. Why are you saying this year? What happened? And so I think that's a lot of it. If you can't get in the field, if you can't go to visit the site, then you need to be asking those critical questions. But again, nothing beats going to see for yourself and talking to other stakeholders in the company itself.
And you mentioned that, kind of those critical questions, but then also critical thought as well, because so much of what we're looking at here is is automation of a mine site in Mali, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Or to be honest, is it a bit of both? And it depends on the angle that you're looking at it from, so how do we really tee up those discussions with that critical thought and say, let's challenge some of those metrics that we're using to make those decisions, blah, 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 so that how do we get that critical thought onto the table?
I think it's that we need to be part of the discussion. Again, I may be coming from a very operational point of view, but the social team are always on the sideline, and the environmental team, I'd say even less, in discussions. Usually, when they need access to land, that's when the social team is really critical, and we're at the forefront of meetings. And what do we need to do in order to get the bulldozer right? And then, or we need to extend over here. How do we need to do it? But when it actually comes to strategic planning, we kind of get the leftovers. So it's like, well, if there's, we'll allocate you this amount of money, or, if we can get that, then, you can run with that and do your thing, and then we get on with ours. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say for the vision for the future. I think that it's coming slowly because we're all having this conversation, but ensuring that we're at that table for discussions. And that, again, so health and safety is always number one, which, it's a serious one. It's a fatality we're talking about. But I would argue that environmental and social issues will need to climb up there as well, because it's huge impact in the long term for these people. So it's maybe not sudden death, but it's, it affects people quite seriously in the longer term.
And I mean, I guess we saw that come to reality with what happened at Juukan Gorge. That almost turned into health and safety versus cultural awareness and respect, and almost the kind of the rules and the culture within that organization being, no, health and safety is number one, potentially to the detriment of lots of other things as well. So actually getting that more balanced opinion, is that a correct case study to bring to the table?
Yes, I think so. It's just, again, you have to hold everything in tension. So, I know that people get frustrated with social people saying, we want this and it's going to take us 3 months, and they have to, go ahead and do their stuff. But it's holding everything in tension. It's being sure that you have thought through all of these aspects, that you've included them, that you've discussed it, and that informed decisions are being made. And also allowing communities and workers to participate in that decision making. I think, in a lot of times when we look at, when I do kind of auditing, the engineers have maybe thought through stuff, and let's take the tailings one as a classic one. The TSF, tailings storage facility, engineers are all about it. They're trying to take in the environmental, stop seepage, do this, do that, and the other. But we're afraid of communicating to stakeholders, where we're afraid of letting them into the conversation in case, they might mess up all of our plans. So I think it's kind of getting over that and working together.
Yeah, they might say no.
Might say no, and then what do we do?
Yeah. So final question then, Rachel, if I may, kind of building on, I guess, the inspiration from the likes of Lorraine and then Kirsty and Jeff from earlier on today. So making sure that we have, say, social experts, etc., at that decision-making table. Most of the world's mining companies, I suspect, and I haven't done any research on this, are led by people who are originally engineers, geologists, or accountants. I think is probably the where they actually come from. And so therefore, again, being quite naive with this and making lots of assumptions, their decision-making process is kind of what they've been programmed to do, which is, the engineering or the accountancy decision-making process. Do we need the likes of either yourself or other social experts to actually become the CEOs of these companies to then change this thought? Probably this feels like the most horrible job offer in the entire world. But actually, do we need that? Do we actually need the new CEO of Rio Tinto or whoever to actually come from a sustainability background or something, and would that create a big change in the company? Or do you think it's actually, no, we need to fundamentally change the way in which we are mining? And I'm not having a bash at Rio Tinto, it just happens to be the company that came out my mouth first.
Well, the funny thing is, it requires a paradigm shift even in my brain. You know, when you say to me, could you be CEO of a mining company? Oh, gracious, run away. I would have no idea how to get tonnage out and how to ensure that the right ore is going to the right place. And, you know, all of that's gobbledygook to me. Which probably means that everything I say socially to a finance operational person is also gobbledygook to them. At the minute, but maybe I need to also rethink my thoughts on the matter. I'm not really asking, because I do think a mining company's core business is to extract minerals, and it's quite a complex process and an engineering feat. But I think what we need is that CEOs, executive teams, boards, always have the environmental and social voice now, just at the same way as health and safety do, to ask those questions of them, because they are thinking down a certain track. You know, they've got a target, they've got an objective, they've got investors waiting on the return, shareholders wanting information, and all that has to be provided, and it is very technical. But they need to be held to account socially, and they just need somebody that has that lens to come alongside them and say, have you considered this? Have you taken this into account? Do we need to slow down the planning process? I think a lot about the construction, because at the minute that's what's my little hobby horse. It's that, you know, often what happens is companies are raising money to go into construction. And so they're working very hard to get that. They get a small amount of money and go, right, we can go, and boom, from, you know, one day to the next, we need access to land, we need to go. But nothing's in place. You know, you've gone from exploration and all of a sudden communities are going, whoa, what's going on? And ideally, I think, you know, IFC is talking about 12 months to 2 years to kind of set things up in a way that's sustainable. But, you know, our finance engineering guys will just shake their heads and go, but we don't have that time. So it needs to be, that's why, you know, I'm saying it has to be fundamentally rethought the way we do it. And people need to, investors, people, everybody on this call need to hold companies to account and go, hang on a minute, you know, you only announced then that there was a project and now you're already building. Well, where, you know, how have you had time to ensure that land has been properly purchased and accessed, that the livelihood restoration programs are started for communities, etc., etc.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Rachel. Absolutely brilliant. And there are lots of comments that are beginning to come in chat as well. So everybody, please put your hands together for the fantastic Rachel Johnston. Fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Brilliant. Great.